In recent years, some movements have seemed to be gaining ground. For example, in Europe, it is quite common for environmental activists to go to museums and art galleries and throw paint or food at works of art that are extremely valuable to humanity. Climate activists are individuals who are committed to, or at least they claim to be, raising awareness and taking action on environmental and social issues such as climate change or inequality and so on. However, in some specific cases, these individuals and groups adopt quite extreme tactics, to say at least. On the other hand, even if these individuals have an interesting message to offer, they can often come up as opting for extremely questionable methods, such as vandalism, radical attitudes, crimes in general, illegal things. Which begs the question, why do some people, and especially women, tend to do those things? And to analyze this, psychoanalysis, of course, offers us a very interesting perspective, because one of the things that motivated Freud to create it was exactly what he called hysteria. The hysteria is a word that comes from the Greek and means exactly uterus. Hysteria was a form of illness that many doctors, even in Freud's time, believed to be nothing more than a falsehood, whether it was women who simply wanted to attract attention, gain pity, or escape the responsibilities of life at the time, such as working, taking care of the house, or even children. It was then accompanied mostly by physical symptoms that were inexplicable and that always seemed to be very dramatic, with very rapid and unstable changes in mood, sometimes with an identification with other people's symptoms. That is, imagining or seeing someone with a back pain, for example, with tremors and so on, sometimes caused a type of contagion and what the other person had to the hysteric itself. But Freud's great insight was to associate the symptoms of hysteria not only as symptoms, but also as messages that sometimes communicated deeper problems. In Freud's own words, what is at issue is often some experience which the patient does not like to discuss, but this occurs mainly because he is in fact unable to recall it and often has no suspicion of the causal connection between the triggering event and the pathological phenomenon. As a rule, it is necessary to hypnotize the patient and to provoke under hypnosis his memories of the time when the symptoms first appeared. Any experience that can evoke distressing effects, such as those of fright, anguish, shame, or physical pain, can act as trauma of this nature. The patient wished to forget, and therefore he had intentionally repressed and unconscious thought, inhibiting and suppressing them. It is precisely distressing things of this nature that, under hypnosis, we find the basis of hysterical phenomena. For example, the hysterical delusions of saints and nuns, of chaste women, and well-bred children. In this way, events from a person's past cause certain psychological scars, which sometimes also became physical problems, even without seeming to have an apparent cause. Something that at the time seemed to be a revolutionary idea, and the way to cure this, so to speak, would then be through the recall of these events through the spoken word. In other words, it will be providing the person with exactly what they previously avoided doing. In the same way that the word pharmakon, which gives rise to pharmacy and medicine, meaning both cure and poison, the medicine for hysteria then would be exactly opposing the person to what the cure caused their illness. And imagining that what caused the hysterical illness would be exactly this, keeping things for the person too much and not saying them out loud, the treatment would exactly be the opposite, by putting those things out, to bringing what the person made unconscious and bringing them to consciousness, revealing these things to even themselves. We find the same longing as one of the basic factors of a great historical institution, the Roman Catholic confessional. Saying things is a relief. It discharges tension, even when the person to whom they are said is not a priest, and even when no absolution is sought. When this outlet is denied to excitement, it sometimes becomes a somatic phenomenon, as happens with excitement pertaining to traumatic effects. He that has eyes to see and ears to hear may convince himself that no mortal can keep a secret. If his lips are silent, he chatters with his fingertips. Betrayal oozes out of him at every pore. What does this mean? Well, sometimes those people don't have sex and they really want to have sex, so they don't talk about that. So they become hysterical. The pains and the screams and the anger and so many different symptoms, they all come from that. At least this is the Freudian theory. However, for Freud, many of these inhibitions were nothing more or less than inhibitions, mostly sexual. That is, when a person had a sexual desire, a thought or an excitement, which he later called libido, and this person tried to deny to themselves that these things was happening, and instead of declaring, admitting, getting it out, thus making this desire inhibited, it would then be transformed into some kind of psychological symptom. Here, for example, the so-called hysteria. That is why the treatment would be linked to admitting that you, whether like it or not, you, me, and everyone else has these desires, and that continuing to keep them inside certainly does not bring any benefit. On the contrary, in addition to creating hysteria, doing this also distances you from what you really want. Indeed, the first appearance of sexual feelings and representations is often sufficient in itself to bring about an intense state of excitement because of its conflict with the deeply rooted representation of moral purity. A state of excitement of this nature is usually followed by psychic consequences, such as pathological depression and states of anxiety. In other words, many depressive symptoms comes from exactly this. Those people who are depressed, well, for Freud, they just don't have sex, and that's why they are depressive. Sometimes, however, certain coincidental circumstances bring about an abnormal somatic phenomenon in which the excitement is discharged. Thus, there may be vomiting when the feeling of impurity produces physical sensation of nausea, or nervous cough, as in NaO, when moral anxiety provokes a spasm of the glottis, and so on. In other words, many of the hysterical symptoms, in addition to having sexual inhibition as a causa sui, had injured form of expression in their pathology, something related to this inhibition itself. Considering, for example, that many of these women are there in art museums or are appreciating, instead of appreciating beautiful things, they try to destroy that. Just like those feminists, radical feminists that say that beauty and beauty standards are oppressive. Why are those people doing that? Well, using this chain of thought, maybe they don't see themselves as beautiful as well, and that's why they want to destroy beauty so much, not only in art museums, but in the whole society, in the society in general. And considering that most radical climate activists are women, for example, their questionable behavior and cries of despair through their activism could indeed be an example of these repressed emotions that are expressed in unsociable ways. As Freud himself writes, when lips are silent, people scream in different ways. And after all, what would be the best way to scream if not literally? And like a baby that cries and screams and struggles to receive care, what do these women want when they do the same things in these places, in public places, in museums, or even on the internet? What need might not be being met for them to do those sorts of things that most people certainly don't do? Well, for Freud, the psychoanalytic approach and all the reports we've seen in this video so far could be that in the same way that men are driven to aggression, women would be also driven to hysteria because of sexual inhibition or sexual frustration. These repressed emotions were called repression by Freud, but for Nietzsche also called them ressentiment, which he relates to the myth of Lucifer, the fallen angel. You know, Lucifer, who was one of the most powerful and beautiful angels who served God in heaven, and nevertheless very arrogant and desired to be equal to God, to the point of wanting his downfall. And because of all this envy and resentment, Lucifer ends up carrying out a celestial rebellion, which causes him to be banished to hell. In a way, he became an activist, because this is what those people do. They look at those other people who are apparently more beautiful, who are apparently more social adept, who are more rich, and they want those people to come down. They don't want to rise up to their level. They want everyone to be equal. Not being equally rich or equally having a better life, but being equally poor and equally mentally unstable, perhaps, just as those people are. And back to this analogy of Lucifer, we can interpret this in two ways. At least I see this in this view. First, the Christian view of hell as a real place, and after you die, you really will burn in hell in the depths of the earth. Or the second interpretation, that in truth, hell is just a symbol for the results of Lucifer's actions. That is, if a person full of hate, envy, and resentment starts to seeking revenge, the only thing that they can end up achieving with it is going to an even worse place. Doesn't it make sense? This idea that negative emotions produce negative behaviors and therefore negative results in your life. Mostly that thing that most problems that you have are only in your head, And isn't this what those people are doing? Aren't they just looking for problems where problems doesn't really exist? Like really, how will you solve the hunger of the world by throwing food away? Does that even make sense? I don't think it does. This is pure resentment, and resentment can be fueled by a sense of injustice, of inferiority, leading to a search for retaliation against those who are perceived as privileged or superior. In the case of Lucifer, it would be God. In the case of climate and liberal activists, it would be the rich who invest in art museums. And in the case of school shooters, it could be the whole society, as you can see in my 1 hour long video here. Which led us to understand some of the motivations of these people. While men become shooters due to resentment, women can become radical feminists because of this same thing. And all of this is because all of those people didn't have much sex. But the question is why? Why aren't those people fucking? Why do those people have the sexual frustration, and why they are doing this? Well, this is something I will delve deeper on the next video regarding how absent father creates incels and e-girls. And I'm also planning to do a video on why liberal women are less happy. But yeah, this will be on another video. Now, does this video make any sense to you? I hope it does, because it really does for me. If you are a hysterical person, you can click the link in the description and book a consultation with me. And if you're not, well, you can do that as well. My name is Julio Cesar, I'm a clinical psychologist in Brazil, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye.